The book we'll be talking about today is Snow Falling on Cedars by David Gutterson.
Snow Falling on Cedars is set in post-World War II in the fictional town of San Pedro Island, which is placed north of Puget Sound. Snow Falling on Cedars is the story of a long-lost love and a murder.
San Pedro is a town that relies on fishing and farming as its major industries, with many Japanese people living and working there. At this time, many people discriminated against the Japanese under the prejudice that all of them were evil and dirty. This, of course, wasn't right, but it was the preconceived idea and the lack of understanding of the Japanese culture that proves many suspicions to be untrue.
The story mainly focuses around the fishermen Carl Hain, Kabuo Miyamoto, Hatsu Miyamoto, Ishmael Chambers, and many other minor characters.
When Carl mysteriously dies one foggy night while fishing, Kabuo was questioned and arrested for the murder of Carl Hain. As the story goes on, the reader learns about the dispute over land between the Hain family and Miyamoto family. This appears as a motive for Kabuo, but not everything always appears as it seems.
The other twist of this story is the love connection between Kabuo's wife Hatsu and the one-armed reporter Ishmael Chambers. The struggle of the union of a white man and a Japanese woman opens the reader's eyes to the ideas and social problems of this small community, and even in the U.S. at this time in history.
The main theme of this book we decided is prejudice. Prejudice has to do with irrational attitudes and opinions held by one group against another. Discrimination refers to the behaviors against a specific group. The problems of San Pedro Island turn out to be instigated by a very important historical event, Pearl Harbor.
As we know, on December 7th, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The next day, the United States and Britain declared war on Japan.
2 months later, on February 19th, 1942, the lives of thousands of Japanese Americans were dramatically changed when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. This order led to the assembly and evacuation and relocation of nearly 122,000 men, women, and children of Japanese ancestry on the west coast of the United States.
Because of this, many lives were changed, which ties to our story. Kabuo Miyamoto was accused of murder, some because of the tension between him and Carl, and more some because many citizens on the island believed he was guilty. Not because they saw it happen or they heard him say it. He was mostly accused because he was Japanese.
Although prejudice, discrimination, and social problems have been around forever, it doesn't mean all of it is justified. Often, it seems prejudice flourishes with an informed mind. For example, during World War II, millions of Jewish people were exterminated in concentration camps because Nazis sought racial purity that brings up many issues that seem to come back to race and ethnicity.
It is said that many prejudices are passed down from parents to children, and this is also portrayed in the book. Many citizens try to avoid the Japanese on the island, including children.
A very important thing that we look into in the book is Carl's mom, Etta, who we learn had a very deep resentment for the Japanese.
Yeah, from a very young age, even though Carl wasn't discriminating Kabuo, Etta had always been against the Japanese, always. This is before anything happened with the murder. She just was always against them, and they had a land dispute because Carl's dad had agreed to sell Kabuo's father 7 acres of land, and they had almost paid off all the money for these 7 acres of land. And around that time, Carl's dad had died.
No, that was before they were sent to the concentration camps.
But
he died. When they came back, he was dead.
And they came back,
Yeah.
and Etta
had taken charge.
And she wasn't going to give them the 7 acres of land.
So that led to a lot of tension and frustration between Kabuo and Carl, who were friends before, but because of Edda and the whole war, they kind of became to just be, I wouldn't say enemies, but kind of, I don't know.
They weren't enemies, but he resented
Yeah, I would say
Kabuo
resentment.
because he had fought against the Japanese. It was just the way he was set into thinking.
Yep.
He was set to think that the Japanese were bad, and that's not exactly his fault. It's just the way it was, and it just happened. And so Kabuo had gone to war and went to fight,
Yep.
and he wasn't, like, when he was fighting, he wasn't discriminated against.
No.
Even with all the soldiers he was with, they didn't discriminate against him, even though he was Japanese. It wasn't until he got back that everybody on the island was discriminating against him, and he was singled out. Not just him, but all the Japanese on the island, and everybody in the community, basically.
Yeah. He felt like he went and fought for this country, and then he came home, and the people he fought for weren't accepting of him or understanding of him, is how he felt pretty much. And so a major thing in the story is when he gets arrested is that it's an assumption that he killed Carl. Like, nobody was there to see it. It was the fact that it was a foggy night and they were fishing in the same area that they just assumed that he had killed him, which
There was no evidence.
there wasn't complete evidence of it.
There was evidence that Kabuo had line on Carl's boat, and Kabuo's motor was on Carl's boat, wasn't it?
No, battery.
Battery, yeah.
Battery, spare battery.
And it didn't fit, and people just assumed, oh, he had gone onto Carl's boat and had killed him. And the way that Carl was killed was, it was
a head wound.
It was a head wound, and it was similar to that of Japanese. Like, it was the same technique that they use.
Like a samurai technique or something.
Yeah, it was that had killed Carl. We later find out that it wasn't that at all.
No.
Carl had been killed because shipping.
There was
fleet
a
or
different
something.
accident, we'll just say that.
Yeah, and Kabuo was innocent this entire time, but nobody believes him, and
No.
until the end at least. But
No, and so while he's in jail, everybody's just hating on Kabuo and Kabuo's family and his wife Hatsu, because it's just the assumption that he did it, which wasn't fair because there wasn't a solid piece of evidence that said he did it.
they were basically, said he was guilty because of his face. They didn't.
Yep. There was only one jury member in the story that didn't believe that that believed he was not guilty.
Yeah.
Everybody else believed he was guilty because they looked at the face of Kabuo and not at the evidence and the facts of the story.
Yeah. And we should include that, it was a long trial.
It was a very long trial.
It went through an entire winter, basically.
Yep.
So,
The
people,
dispute.
it came towards the end that they just wanted to get it done. They didn't even care what was the outcome. They just the jurors wanted the case to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Except for this one juror, like you said.
Who argued with it.
Yeah.
The jury ended up naming him guilty, but there's some things that twist later on in the story that kind of change Kabuo's fate, but overall, that's what happened.
Yeah. I think what bothers me is that Carl's known Kabuo his whole life, and Kabuo fought in the war for the United States, and he should be treated fairly. It was unjust for all these citizens on the island to single him and his family out, and even all the other Japanese after they came back from those camps.
Yep. The concentration camps. It was just the prejudice the nation had at that time. I mean, we even still have it now.
Yeah.
It's just with new people coming into America, we don't like change, I guess. And the people in the story just believe that the Japanese were there for bad and not for good.
Yeah. The funny thing is, though, before Pearl Harbor, all these Japanese people, they were living on the island there.
Yeah.
So they were all neighbors. Everybody knew, like, they were neighbors. They knew each other. And yet when the war was over...
The resentment just grew bigger, is
Yeah.
what I would say. It was there all along, but...
Even though it wasn't their fault, it was...
No. It was still directed towards them.
Yeah. I think with Pearl Harbor, it added to all that.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think it was as strong, and I think a lot of people had respect for, like, Kabuo's family, the Miyamotos. But when they had come back from the West Coast and stuff,
Yeah.
it was...
When they came back from the concentration camps and the war, it was more of a, like, oh, why are you here kind of a thing.
Yeah. They didn't want them back. They wanted them gone. They didn't want them, even in the United States, they didn't think they were citizens.
No.
They weren't treated as citizens.
No.
Which goes into how Kabuo should have had a fair trial with these jurors. Everybody has a right to a fair trial.
Yep.
So it wasn't right for almost all of the jurors, except for one.
Except for one, which is just... It's really sad to
say
see.
that he's guilty. And he
Yeah.
wasn't.
Well, I think that about wraps everything up.
Yep, that wraps it up.